Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to this week's Edge Breakdown with myself and Hilow. As we're starting this broadcast, we just got the update that I'm going to change the wording I'd like to use there, that the Jets doctors are not clearing Mike White and that Zach Wilson will be starting. Rip my best ball Garrett Wilson shares, rip my Elijah Moore shares. And that's where we're starting. We're going to cover the 3-game slate on Saturday. We're going to cover the Colts, Vikings, the Ravens, the Browns, and a possible snowmageddon in the Dolphins and Bills. And if you're listening to this on your favorite 1.5 speed, don't forget you can come see our pretty faces over on YouTube as well. We got lots of data up on YouTube for you guys to look at. And we're going to get into the Jets news right away. How are you feeling about that, Hilow?
Dude, the slate was so clear to me about 10 minutes ago. I was like, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I knew exactly what the field was likely to do. There's a bunch of fragile chalk pay up running backs on the slate. I knew that I wanted to go elsewhere. And I knew that I wanted to utilize a Mike White double. And it was like, this slate is so clear to me how I wanted to attack it in single entry. And then we get the news that the Jets doctors are not clearing Mike White and that Zach Wilson is going to start. And that completely changes the dynamics of what was my favorite game environment to attack this week. So you look at all the data, we had a fairly significant sample size because we had 6 games where Zach Wilson did not start for the Jets this season. In those games, the Jets were at or above league average in offensive plays run from scrimmage in every single one. We have a 7-8 game sample where Mike White or where Zach Wilson was starting. They were at or above league average in offensive plays run from scrimmage once in his first game. So it's a very clear change in dynamics from that team, how they're trying to win games with Zach Wilson and then with not Zach Wilson. Zach Wilson is indecisive. He has turnover issues. He tries to attack downfield, but Robert Saleh is trying to rein that in because they don't want to, they have a defense to where it's why would I want my quarterback to lose the game for us? So the whole dynamics of how the Jets offense is going to run now completely flip on its head. And they've already confirmed that it'll be Zach Wilson instead of Joe Flacco. So that's a bummer too. It's anybody but Zach Wilson, dude.
I'm actually at the point. I feel like Flacco did hooked up with one of the coach's wives or something. There's no way they're watching the tape and thinking Zach Wilson gives them a better chance to win at this point. These are smart guys, right? Saleh's a smart guy. These guys are intelligent and creative. And I have to wonder at this point, what do they look at, from a coaching perspective, right? I've coached a lot at a pretty high level. And especially, a lot in my 20s. And I look back and I say, okay, if I'm watching this tape, right, if I'm breaking this tape down, what am I watching? What do I think he does that's going to give me a better chance to win? And I just don't understand what they see other than, there is a possibility he's a little bit in the doghouse for something. That's the narrative I'm telling myself because I don't understand why.
Yeah, it would be a little different if this team were guaranteed, if they had already locked up their playoff spot, or if because then it would be well, let's give Zach Wilson some reps. He obviously has some ways to go. Right. Or if they were eliminated, but they're sitting in the 8th seed in the AFC, and it's they have to win and they have to get some help to get in the playoffs. So yeah, I don't know, man. It's now it just makes me think that now the Jets are going to try and win this game with their defense, and they're going to play a conservative game plan, which is not what I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
I wanted that desperation factor from this game with two teams that have to win to get in. Well, have to win and get some help from here on out, basically, to get in.
Yeah, this was I really like that spot too. So I'll be interested to break it down with Mike, and once we have a little bit more news and we kind of get through today and we do the cast with him. I want to talk about our boy, someone we have talked about every week, and talk about last night's slate a little bit. Mr. Kittle broke the slate last night. Of course, he did it on a Showdown.
Yep.
Right. But we've been saying, if you listen to us at all, if you read OWS at all, we've been saying for weeks, he's going to break one of these like he did. Right. He's going to get there. He was just shy of the bonus, but he had the 2 TDs, and we knew he could get you there at some point. For me, I was talking to Mark about this before. This is the second time now this season for me. I have had someone tackled at the 1 yard line, and if they would have scored, I would have won the Showdown slate. I play a lot of 5-1. I think there's a lot of leverage there in Showdown, and the risk I'm willing to take is when I miss, I really miss. There's no chance I'm min cashing. I'm either at the top or I'm at the bottom, which in these showdowns, which is what I'm trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's my approach. I do a little bit of 4-2, but I'm probably 80-20, 90-10, 5-1 that I play on, especially single entry, because of the leverage I believe it gives on the field. And if anybody's read anything about me or talked to me or listened to me, they know I'm a lifelong diehard Niner fan. My wife and I have attended games for years and years. We were at the Vernon Davis, catch where there was 4 touchdowns against the Saints to go. We were at the last game at Candlestick. We were at the last NFC Championship game. We go to Niners games. We are big Niners fans, and I am lucky. I have an amazing wife that loves football. Well, she loves the Niners. She doesn't really care to watch a bunch of other stuff, but she loves the Niners with me, and so it makes it fun. So last night I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, right. I almost got there. And what I did was I ran a CMC double stack with Mason. And the story I told was, if Kittle breaks the slate and they're up, and if you look at Twitter, I was talking about it with quite a few people last night. I just said, I think the Niners are going to spank them. I think that their defense is going to get after them. And it played out close to how I thought it would. And I thought Mason at his ownership would give me a ton of leverage. So he wasn't there. Everybody's in the box. And I literally look at it and I go, if he gets 4 yards, he's gone. Like, he's gone.
Mm-hmm.
They got everybody up because they're trying it, right? They got to stop him. They got to end the game. And he breaks it. And I am screaming at the TV, screaming, because I know where I stand, because I was watching and I was like, man, if something could have happened here, we could have got there. And I was real close, and I'm really and I was happy with my process last night. And I start screaming, and I'm watching that DB chase me down. It was like slow motion. I could just see him wheeling him in, and I was like, oh, he's going to get him. He's going to get him. I'm like, I literally stiff arm him, right? I'm screaming dive, and he got tackled at the 1. And I finished, I did really well last night, but I didn't get that big paycheck, which, I was talking to my wife about, and she was like, oh, how we do? And I was like, these are super top heavy. I'm like, you basically got to win. And I was like, it was really close. And that's the second time this season, that beginning of the season when DeAndre Carter caught that pass and got tackled at the 1 in the Chargers game. And then Palmer went and scored that touchdown. If Everett, Williams, or Carter score that touchdown instead of Palmer, or Eckler rushes it in, even if Eck rushes it in and he doesn't get the bonus from the catch, I win that one as well. So that's 2 times this season already for me. So I had to get that out because I just had to vent a little bit after last night, because I was a little tilted still early this morning. And but that's what makes showdowns fun, right? Is you the last second of the game, it can totally change, right?
And maddening at the same time.
Yeah, it was so close. So, well, speaking of maddening, let's get into this Colts Vikings game. And I think there's going to be some people that overthink how to play this Saturday slate with these 3 games. We saw it yesterday, and I'm going to lead into it a little bit later. But if you've been on, Twitter talking to guys, people are talking about sitting Tyreek, right? Because of the snow. Wild to me. And people did it last night. People said, hey, I'm going to sit Kittle. And even more crazy is people were sitting CMC because everybody was on Seattle. Like, there was people that sat McCaffrey. Like, and my question I proposed was, why do you draft a guy first, second, or third overall to sit them in the first week of the playoffs. If you're in season long, maybe you have a bye, but this is first week of playoffs for a lot of people. So as we get into this, I want to talk about ownership a little bit. And, we know what a pass funnel the Vikes D has been. How do you see leverage coming on the field? We were just talking about ownership a little bit, and right now Taylor is coming in at 53% ownership. Yeah. Next closest is Dalvin at 37, and then Chubb at 20. Right, like that's against the Vikes run D, which is middle of the field. How are you feeling about Taylor there?
The Vikings run D is top 5 in a lot of metrics.
Right.
We'll start there. So there's talking about the slate from the top down. So starting with like the macro and going backwards, there's a lot to say about the state of the slate without giving away too much that's behind the paywall, because there's a lot of information that I unpack in the slate write-up of the Saturday slate, because I tackled all 3 of these games in a similar fashion that to what I did on Thanksgiving slate. So I broke down each game, and then I went into like a combined game theoretics and DFS plus interpretation. So without giving away too much of what's behind the paywall there for the Inner Circle members, there's a lot going on with respect to like the macro, or I guess where I feel like the field is likely to go here, and the macro state of the slate. All the talk about what's going on with this slate of games is with the snow in Buffalo. They're expecting like 6 to 8 inches, and they're expecting a couple of inches of snowfall during the game. So over that 3 hours, they're expecting some mild to moderate wind. So like 15 mile per hour sustained with gusting to like 25 miles per hour. The field is looking at, I feel like the field is looking at team totals and being like, oh, the Colts are implied to score the 3rd highest on the slate. Like, let's just throw them in. Well, it's like, wait a second. Like, what? We're completely neglecting like who the Colts are. We're completely neglecting how they are trying to win games under Jeff Saturday. We're completely neglecting the fact that Matt Ryan is dust. We're like, it's like we're blowing this 14-week sample that we've seen, or this 4-week sample that we've seen with Jeff Saturday, and being like, let's play the Colts because they're in a dome and they have a high team total.
That was literally my number one note to talk to you about today of the whole slate, was that right there.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on from a crowd psychology standpoint here. I'll just leave it at that for now.
Yeah. It's I think that's a good way to put it. And let's talk about that. Let's get into the macro side of the whole slate with it being 3 games. And I'm going to run through some ownership, right? Because like I said, we just got some of it, some projected ownership. And let's talk about, I'm going to just break down each position real quick, and we can kind of talk about the macro side. So we're start at quarterback. Ready? So shocking. Josh Allen's coming in at 35%, right? Mm-hmm. No, nobody's surprised. Cousins is coming in at 30. Deshaun at 23. Matt Ryan at 18. Huntley at 9. Tua has a 4% projected ownership. Let me say something right now. If Tua gets 4% ownership, I don't care what the weather is, with how they correlate their offense. I'm running Tua. Like I'm figuring out how to make it work. We talked about it earlier in the season. It goes back to why they didn't go nuts was when we got Allen, when there was concern about his elbow, right? And he was at such low ownership that week. And the question was, when are you going to get Allen in such low ownership? You're just not, right? Like I played a little more 20s that week just because I wanted some exposure to that. So we have that. So, right. So we just talked about Taylor and Cook up there at the top for running backs, right? Next we got Chubb. Interesting as we go down above JK and Edwards, who are real close to each other, is Kareem. So the backup Cleveland running back is getting more run than what is the starting running back. And then we got Singletary right now is projected at 0.7 ownership at only $5,500. Wild to me. That's just wild. Wide receiver, kind of what we expect up top a little bit. Jefferson, clear alpha, right? He's getting the cup roll, 45%. Second, though, is Pittman at 38, and then Thielen at 34. So I think we're going to see a lot of, right? We're going to see a lot of Cousins double stacks would be my, on based on projected ownership we see. Then, right, we have Gabe Davis at 30%. So let me share with you the wide receivers that are above currently projected 10% ownership. Stephon Diggs. Yeah, correct. I said Stephon Diggs. KJ Osborne, Isaiah McKenzie, Alec Pierce, Demarcus Robinson, Jalen, Amari, Paris, People Jones, and then the top. That's crazy to me. It's Stephon Diggs. And that's where he is. And then tight end kind of went how I expected when I opened it up a little bit. I thought Andrews would be a little higher. We have Hawk at 32, Andrews a projected 20, Knox, Njoku, and then we get down into the likelies, Gasecki's, Gransons, Bryant's, Woods, Smyths, those guys. So opening up, I think we're seeing an interesting ownership projected. Now that you've heard those numbers, what's your gut reaction? What is, if you were looking at this and nobody was watching you, what notes would you make off of those, seeing those projections? Walk some people through a little bit of DFS theory for me.
The theory is a little bit different on a 3-game slate when you get more information as the day goes. In the sense that the NFL has scheduled these games on Saturday, like the Thanksgiving slate, where we play one game, we get a 45-minute break. Then we play the next one, we get a 45-minute break, and then we play the final game. So while the field is probably trying to work out how they want to construct their rosters as if all these games were playing at the same time, the optimal way to approach a slate like this is just trying to make it to the next decision point as close to optimal as you can be. What does that mean? That means taking a wait and see approach to make these decisions, to make this, to decide these theoretical, or to have these theoretical discussions, as opposed to doing it on Friday, the day before the slate kicks off, where it's like, this is how my roster is going to be for the slate. Going down that same rabbit hole, we're just gonna open it, dude. We're just gonna get into it because I don't want to play this like I got a secret thing. Go check out like Inner Circle. Let's just fucking do it. Like,
your breakdown is fantastic, by the way. So it is like it's really good. I've read it. I went through it. I read these before we start, and it's I promise to anybody listening to this, you're not getting this kind of game theory and interpretation from many other people in the industry. That's what I'll say about it. And I'll let Hilow break it down and give him the mic here.
So right off the rip, this slate is probably thought of around the industry or around the field as ugly, right? It's like, oh my God, like the best game environment is they're expecting snow, they're expecting wind. The second highest team total on the slate is the Vikings. And then it's like, where do we go? Oh, right, let's go to the Colts. So from the perspective of how do we handle a slate with uncertainty, this is a like GPP bros, as the badge bros call them. This is like a GPP bros wet dream slate. There is so much you can do to embrace uncertainty to gain an edge on the field. We have like Huntley and Deshaun Watson who are playing against each other in very defined paths of least resistance. Like the teams just throw against the Ravens, teams just run against the Browns. We have a game, the final game of the slate is that snow game, Miami at Buffalo, where it's like these teams are both top 5 in pace. They're both top 5 in pass rate over expectation. Does that change because we expect like 15-mile-an-hour winds and snow? Not really. This is not a situation where it's like they're expecting 6 to 8 inches over a 3-hour time span during the game. This is a situation where it's like they're expecting a little bit of snow, like a couple of inches over a 3-hour span is not overly prohibitive. So if the field is like viewing this as like, we don't know where to go, we're going to place our money on the Colts, that's just like, don't do that. Don't place your money on Jeff Saturday and Matt Ryan. Let's just look somewhere else. But jumping back a bit from a macro perspective, that's kind of the view of the slate from a top level perspective. If all these games were being played at once, so like a standard like early only slate, or a more applicable to like a late only slate where it's like you get 3 or 4 games. The fact that we get more information as the slate goes on, we need to be feeding that information into our decision-making matrix, into our process, into how we are biasing our play. So if you take that mindset and build rosters pretty much just like only worrying about the first game, which is where a lot of the field is going to be going on the slate because of the state of the Ravens and the Browns with the uncertainty, because of the uncertainty with the weather with the Dolphins and the Bills. If you just like cut out those 2 games and build like those players from the final 2 games are placeholders at this point. They are just there to show me how salary can work out. All I care about is varying my exposure to the first game to leave as close as optimal from that first game as I can be. We don't know what optimal is from like how salary comes together, but what we do know is if I play 4 players from this first game and only 3 of them put up a GPP viable score, I am not optimal. So how do I adjust from there? If I play 2 players from this game and 3 players go off, like quote unquote go off, if like Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson and like Alec Pierce put up 25 plus fantasy points and you only played 2 of them, you are not optimal. So how do we ship a GPP where we get more information with every passing minute, or like once, we'll just say with every passing game? We have to be as close to optimal at each checkpoint. And if you view each game ending as a checkpoint, now is a place where we need to reassess our decision-making process. So what does that mean from from an actionable perspective? How do I put that into play right now? You build varying combinations of players from that early game. You leave a roster in play that has nobody from the early game. You leave, you play a couple of overstacks from that early game. You mix and match the secondary, tertiary options from that early game. You play the Alec Pierces. You play the Paris Campbells. You play the Jelani Woods. You get a little bit varied with your exposure to that early game, and you do it in a sense that like I don't have to make the decisions for the whole slate right now. What I have to do is I have to be as close to optimal, leaving that first checkpoint, that first decision point, that first game, to where I can adjust things from there. And another way to do that I've been starting to mess around with this year, that Sonic has talked a lot about in the past, is building duplicate builds. Yep. So like build 2 of each roster that you put into play. And a way that I like to attack these small slates where we get more information as the slate progresses is to bump my average buy-in down and enter more rosters, because now you have the ability to build these dummy duo lineups, these double lineups. You have the ability to put more rosters into play and adjust as the games are progressing. So the theoretical aspect of that is like, it's very hard to relinquish the very innate like human want for control, in the sense that like I want to know how my rosters are going to look now. If you fight through that and be like, I only need to know how my rosters are going to look for the first game right now, it gives you that flexibility to adjust. And it gives you this change in mindset where it's like, I don't need optimal for the slate right now. I need optimal for the first game. So how do I build my roster portfolio to account for that? How do I adjust from that once we get the information from the first game? Because although the Colts are garnering a lot of attention here, it's like a ton of JT. And we kind of know why, because he's seeing like a consistent 22 to 25 running back opportunities with Jeff Saturday. That said, the Colts run game against the Vikings run defense is a terrible mismatch for the Vikings defense. The Colts are not generating push up front. They are ranked towards the bottom of the league in adjusted line yards. The Vikings are actually ranked in the top 10 in a lot of run metrics. So, and oh, by the way, unless otherwise forced, we can almost be certain that the Colts are not going to come out firing through the air here. So it's like they're going to get maybe a quarter and a half, maybe 2 quarters of like increased pass, maybe bias. And that's a very specific way for this game to play out. So all of that comes in, like we can expect maybe 2 to 3 targets for Jonathan Taylor. We can expect probably 19 to 22 carries, somewhere in that range. Can he basically, because he's relinquished to like this yardage and touchdown back kind of profile, can he get there? Can he score? Can he rush for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns against or in a difficult matchup behind a pretty shitty run blocking offensive line? At 50% ownership, my answer would probably be like, I'll put my money elsewhere. And there's a lot of interesting places that you can go to do that.
Let me ask this way for you. So I aggregated all the ownership together. Okay. So I just pulled it all together. I'm going to name off the first 7 players in ownership. And it literally links back to what Mark was just talking about. Jonathan Taylor, Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, TJ Hawkinson, Michael Pittman, Adam Thielen, Kirk Cousins. As of today, projected ownership across a 3-team slate, the top 7 are from this game. And you didn't know that yet because these just came out. Everybody just released projections. He hasn't had a chance to look at them. And I think this directly correlates to exactly what you're talking about, right? How do you leverage this game? Where do you get leverage from and get away from the field? And I think that's a perfect example of what you're just talking about.
Yeah. And the names that I didn't hear on that list are the names that I am most drawn to from this game in the secondary options from the Colts. It's like Paris Campbell, Alec Pierce. Like Paris with Matt Ryan is like the guy that can get open in the first 5 yards for this offense. So we can basically think of Paris as like Matt Ryan's safety blanket. And that's a good thing because Matt Ryan needs his blankie. The Alec Pierce is the downfield option in this offense. He is the guy that is the desperation mode engaged player. With the way that this game is likely to play out, both of those profiles are highly, highly intriguing in the sense that the Vikings, first of all, the Colts are dead last in the league in turnover margin this season. The Vikings create pressure on defense and they get turnovers. So thinking about like what is the likeliest way for this game to play out, that's likely to be a factor. Matt Ryan mistakes are likely to be a factor here.
So along that, what team, hint, hint, wink, wink, gives up the most as of today going into this week? What team has given up the most points per game in fantasy by outside wide receivers? I'll give you 20 guesses, but you're probably only going to need one.
The Vikings?
Yes, the Vikings lead the league at 30.1 points given up in fantasy points on average to outside wide receivers. And that again directly correlates into what you're talking about, right? Like, how do you go there? How do you attack them? And how do you pivot off of all that ownership? I think this is a great spot to not get overcommitted to that game and look at Campbell or Pierce and say, okay, I think this is a great way to leverage it.
Yeah. And like adding to that is like Kylan Granson. Jelani Woods put up a big game, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And that was without Kylan Granson. Kylan Granson came back and re-entered the tight end one, the main pass catching tight end role. Which is interesting because like it's probably this dynamic of Jelani Woods as a rookie. We don't fully trust him. We'll utilize him in a high route rate, so they're not asking him to block much. Kylan Granson gives them a little bit more exposure to a complete tight end. So that's probably why he re-entered like the primary tight end role. That said, like if he's going to maintain this primary tight end pass catching role, if he's going to play 55-60% of the offensive snaps, there is a path to him putting up like 5 catches for 50, 60 yards and a score, and like forcing the issue into the optimal discussion on this slate where tight end is a mess, where like the highest priced tight ends are like TJ Hawkinson and like that's who else is on the slate?
Mark Andrews is.
Mark Andrews. Okay, perfect.
But like to give you an idea though of how Andrews has been this year, he's only $5,700 this week, right? On a three game slate, right? Kelsey would be $7,800 this year, $8,000 on a 3-game slate for Kelsey, where on this 3-game slate is $5,700. And that's an interesting spot for me with tight end just being as ugly as it's been this year.
Yeah, so it's okay. So like the top 3 tight ends are Mark Andrews, TJ Hawkinson, David Njoku. Those are like the top 3 on paper plays. Those are the guys that can put this tiny slate out of reach. It's like you go beyond that. It's like Dawson Knox, Mike Gesicki, who has 0 catches over the last 3 games, Kylan Granson, Harrison Bryant, Jelani Woods. So it's like it gets thin very, very fast. So playing to that, if TJ Hawkinson gets his standard like 6 to 8 target game and he puts up like his standard range of outcomes is like 11 to 15 fantasy points. If he does that, but Kylan Granson, who's at 2,800, sees 6 targets, catches 5 of them and a score, like then it's like, okay, well, now we're into the range of Granson could be optimal on this slate. If you play 0 of him, how are you making up for that? You're making up for that by forcing either David Njoku or Mark Andrews from the second game. Then it's like, if they fail, what am I left with? Shit, like I have to play like Dawson Knox and hope, because I'm not playing Mike Gesicki because he's not in my player pool, and hope that he scores. So like, that's what I mean by like taking it with a step-by-step process, a very like methodical approach to the slate, is like if you don't give yourself at least the pathway to having Kylan Granson exposure from this first game, you could be drawing dead from the jump. And that's not a position that we want to find ourselves in. We want to give ourselves outs on a slate like this to be able to adjust as we get more news. So like, yeah, like I'll have rosters in play that only have like Justin Jefferson, Alec Pierce, and Kylan Granson from this game. I'll have rosters in play that only have Kylan Granson and Paris Campbell. So like there's interesting ways to approach this. Like, what if Justin Jefferson puts up, he has a 12 target game, but he catches 8 for 90 and doesn't score? It's like, Well, he's probably not optimal. Are we likely to see massive exposure on Justin Jefferson? Yeah. So like it's super, super uncomfortable because on paper, like Justin Jefferson is the top play from this game, but we're leaving out the entire discussion of variance. And on a 3-game slate, we have to adopt a little bit more of this like showdown mindset where it's like, I don't know what's going to happen, dude. I know what could happen, and I know how to most optimally build my roster for those varying scenarios. So it's like, yes, like Justin Jefferson is the top play on this slate. He's also one of the most expensive, and he's also in a matchup against a Colts defense that has surrendered the fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers this season. So, like, what could happen in a strength-on-strength matchup? Everything. Everything could happen.
Right.
The entire spectrum. So, like, if Justin Jefferson sees 12 targets, catches 8 of them, and does not score, he's probably not optimal. And as the number of games on a slate decrease, we need to be closer to optimal. Like, look at Showdown. You need the optimal roster to win in that game.
Yep.
Look at a full slate. The delta between optimal scoring in the Millie Maker last year and the winning roster in the Millie Maker last year was about 39 points. So that's significant. You have wiggle room. You don't need optimal. This slate, we need close to optimal. So if you're only playing, if you're locking Justin Jefferson, like he can't fail, I'm just going to play him and move on, and he doesn't put up 35 fantasy points, you are drawing dead. You are not winning.
Right. If we start talking about, we'll go 4X. We won't even go 5, right? I mean, look at, right? So you're telling me on, I want to go back to the tight end here, right? Hawkinson, who's say lands, he's projected around 40% right now. Say he lands there, right? He's at $5,000. So you're saying I got to have him score 20. Say he scores, like you said, 14, 15, right? But a almost 50% Granson or Woods, right, at around 10%, right? Say they score 9, right? Like that, that gets you at that 3,000 number, it gets you 3X. And if they get you to 12, if they get you that TD, right, the salary is going to open up at other positions is pretty amazing. I want to move on here to the next game on the slate, which is the Ravens at the Browns.
Yeah, I think we're only going to talk about the Saturday slate here. I ate up too much time.
Yeah. So that's so let's talk about this game, right? Mm-hmm. So I want to ask your quick opinion. What did you think when JK broke that run and we watched him run and he looked like an antler that had been shot with an arrow and was hobbly trying to get away from the hunter that was going to slice his throat?
When I look at tape, when I watched that run, I'm not looking for breakaway speed. I'm not looking for did he have a limp? I'm looking for his gait. So how his stride looked. Yeah. And he looked like one of those wind-up toys. You wind it up and they go. That's what he looked like.
That's a great explanation.
His gait was probably 50% like as wide as it normally is. So that means his hamstrings are not fully extending. But like super, I'm not going to get into like the fucking human body, but like.
Right, the physiology of it.
Yeah, it's like his muscle groups are not working together properly in his lower extremities, his major muscle groups. So his quads, his hamstrings, and his groin. They're not working together. They're not. And typically what you see when you have a knee injury, when you have a major muscle group injury, like a quad or a hamstring, is the other muscles have to work harder to make up for the fact that that major muscle group is not 100%. So like what I saw from J.K. Dobbins is he was doing these little like mini-me steps. Like his gait was like 50% as wide as it usually is, because his muscle groups are not 100% and working together properly. That's what I saw. He looked like shit on that run. But
what I actually said live watching it is he looked like Fred Flintstone from the old cartoons
yeah.
when he was bowling, like twinkle toes, right?
Yeah.
When he like twinkle toed up to the line. But he didn't have any pliability, right? He didn't look loose. He didn't look fluid. You could see that he wasn't pliable, right? And one of the things that, and I'm going to refer to Brady here, that wow, Brady will joke and he's good about talking about how slow he is, right? One of the things Brady has always been is pliable, right? I think it's one of the things that's really helped him avoid, injury short of that major injury. So for me, with what I'm starting to see, right, as I look at like running back ownership and I start seeing JK at 15% already, I'm like, I got questions. And most importantly, how do I leverage the field on this game? That I think overall, short of Njoku, we're going to see pretty low ownership on what is a 3-game slate and what is the lowest total, right? As you said, how do I get to the next game? And, I think you break that down really well inside the paywall and a good way to leverage it. And I'm not going to give away the farm here because I think it's worth coming in and seeing, but that's a good way to go at it.
Yeah. And like from this game, both teams have a very clear path of least resistance. It doesn't necessarily align with both of how they want to approach the game, but it is a very clear path of like when shit is hitting the fan, when these teams are in the third, fourth quarter and they each know that they need to win here. Like, how are they likeliest to attack? It's probably towards the path of least resistance. And for the Ravens, that is on the ground. And for the Browns, that is through the air.
Yep.
It's like the Ravens are, again, amongst the top 2 teams in pass rate against. The Browns just bleed production on the ground this season. Mm-hmm. So it's like, and this also like this line makes no sense to me also. I don't know how the Browns are 3-point favorites here, because the Ravens are so likely to control the game environment on the ground. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. This is one of those Star Wars "It's a Trap" meme games, right? Like I can see a lot of people getting trapped the way they're looking at it. I can see Vegas trying to trap people with where the numbers are and saying this is what we expect based upon game environment. I have a couple ways I really want to play this game, and if you come into Discord, you'll be able to talk to us about it inside Inner Circle there.
I'm going to ask you a question. What is the ownership on DPJ, and what is the ownership on Gus?
So this is so I had it pulled up. So I love Gus here. This is I'll give it away because I've already talked about it. I love Gus's rush prop over. I've already bet his rush prop. His rush yards are 38.5. So I'm all over that. He is at 3.5% projected as of today. 3.5, right? Against run D? The 30th run D in the league. Just remember that. And then my guy who got me there last week, right? That helped me. I had a really good week overall, and especially on my SEs. DPJ. Now, keep in mind, guys, when we're giving you ownerships here, this is a 3-game slate, so they're inflated, right? This is a full, 10, 12, 15-game slate. DPJ is only at 17%. So when I see that, right, and I see Watson's track history of what position receiver he likes to throw to, right, and then I go pull up average, I look at average fantasy points allowed by the defense, right, and I start looking at where's Baltimore in overall, wide receiver. They give up a lot. They're giving up 37, right? Like that's one, two. I mean, they're 3, 4, 5th. Yeah, so they're 5th in average fantasy points a week to wide receivers.
Check.
Watson.
I'm gonna give away my skeleton key play. I'm just gonna do it, dude.
Ooh, I love it. I love it. Some juice here.
Look at the state of the Browns pass catchers. David
Okay.
Njoku is a primary piece.
Yep.
Amari Cooper is a primary piece. He did not practice Tuesday or Wednesday. He got in a limited session Thursday. He's listed on the injury report as not injury related, rest, hip. It's like, that is injury related, bro. What is you talking about?
Right.
So he's probably going to play. His effectiveness can be put in question. He saw 7 targets last week. He caught only 2 of them. He has not been on the same page with Watson. Then their wide receiver 3, who has now been like an established member of the offense, is David Bell. He did not practice at all this week. He's listed as questionable. He did not practice Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. He's listed with thumb and toe injuries. So his phalanges are all fucked up. That said, like, he has not practiced. It's not a major muscle group or a knee or an ankle, something like that. But the Browns also have Anthony Schwartz, who is on IR. They also have some other injuries, their pass catching core, to where Demetric Felton came in his first game off of IR and was thrust into a similar situation where he had to play the slot wide receiver role. He's listed as a running back and priced at the stone minimum at running back at $4K. Talk about like a piece that nobody is going to be on that could play 65% of the offensive snaps for a team that's probably going to be passing more in a slot wide receiver role. That's what I'd look for, like a piece that nobody's going to be on, that can put up 15 plus fantasy points on a short slate. And this is like full, like showdown mindset. Like, what is the piece that nobody's going to be on that could differentiate, that could separate? It's Demetric Felton, dude, which is really, really weird to think about. But again, that depends on David Bell. That also we're not going to see ownership on him because we're probably not going to get David Bell news until 90 minutes prior, until the kick of the second game, which is like, people are not going to be building rosters with David Bell. With Demetric Felton. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics from this game, in the sense that, one, the field isn't fully embracing how the path of least resistance for each team. 2, the field has very little interest from this game because of the low game total, because of the Browns are favored, because the Browns just scored 3 defensive touchdowns against Houston 2 weeks ago. There's just a lot of bias that's creeping in for this game. There's a lot of interesting ways that you can leverage it. Demetric Felton, Donovan Peoples-Jones, David Njoku is probably my favorite tight end play in a vacuum. And there's ways to view this game through that lens of our discussion previously, which is like, how do I escape this game, the second decision point, with as close to optimal as possible? It's probably getting a little bit funky. It's probably playing the Gus Edwards. It's probably playing the Demetric Feltons, the Donovan Peoples-Joneses. That's kind of my take on this game. Is like, there's probably going to be 1 or 2 players from this game that approach the optimal discussion. And the field is just like, I don't want to play this game. So
you brought it up when we first started talking about, quote, the ugly slate. These are actually my favorite kind of slates because of how the mass and everybody tries to approach it. So let's talk about it. You asked me about ownership. So right now, Njoku's coming in at 33%, number 2 tight end behind Hawk, but he's $800 less, and he's $1,500 less than Andrews, who's at 17%, right? But at wide receiver, we have no David Bell ownership. We have no Felton ownership yet, right? And can't say I'm shocked about that because of the news. But at wide receiver, right, we start getting in. DPJ's at 17%, right? We have him hit there. And then Cooper's at 21%. Again, you're talking about $1,000 difference. And we're just talking about DK. This is a different play on FanDuel and Yahoo. But for the most part, when you hear us talking about ownership, we're talking about that. So that's where we're at there. And then running back, as we talked about, where's everybody going to go? Everybody right now is going to Chubb. They're going to Hunt and then JK. And meanwhile, I can get a $5,000 Gus Edwards at 3.5 to probably ends up at 5% ownership on a 3-team slate. Sign me up. Sign me up for ugly dysfunction. And I'll use last night as an example on the Showdown side. Everybody was on Seattle last night. Everybody loved Seattle. They love DK. They love Lockett, which Lockett's broken hand is brutal for my best ball.
Yeah.
I need to go get a 40 and pour one out. That's how I feel about Lockett, my best ball right now. But let's go back to, and I'll go from there. Go back to Monday, right? I had 5-1 stacks with the Cards, and Kyler going down was brutal in multiple ways for me, right? But when I look at process, I'm like, okay, there. So how do I, and I'm doing it because I'm getting such leverage on the field. And I think that's a great way to look at that slate, because as we talk about it, the darling game of the slate is the night game, is the Dolphins at the Bills. And I get it's going to snow, but I love Mike McDaniel's walking out, wearing I wish it was a bit colder t-shirt. That's, you have to like a guy that's staying loose, and that helps with the team flow. That helps them there. This is a big spot for the Dolphins and the Bills when it comes to home field advantage in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Right. This is a big game.
Both these teams are playing for everything. This is as close to a playoff environment that we'll see out of a Week 15 game this year.
So as we look at that, and I look at Tua coming in as the least owned quarterback, I said at the beginning, just sign me up. I get it's the Bills D. I get it. It's the leverage point for me. We know how correlated their offense is. We know where it's going through. We know we're 99% sure we're not going to see Jeff Wilson. I always leave 1% because I don't trust anybody with any injury reports anymore, especially after the way this season's gone. And I think this is a unique way to look at the slate, especially as we start talking about not just the top guys, but how do you leverage this game and where are you open? So if you have, let's say we have 3, to 4 spots from the first 2 games and we've hit the optimal. We've hit, say, Paris is there, Gus is there, Njoku hits at tight end, and we have, I don't even know who to go there from. We'll go your boy Felton, right, instead of DPJ. So we're there, right? So we're there. We're optimal right now. And you start looking at salary and pivots. How do you approach this? How do you teach someone like this is how we approach that spot in this game?
That's a question that would take an hour coaching session to discuss fully and give it the attention that it needs. I have 2 minutes to talk about this before I have to jump to another podcast perspective. It's probably, you are optimal. You don't need to get as weird. When you think about that within the dynamics of, or the confines of the slate and how a salary cap game works, it's highly likely that not a lot of rosters in play are going to have both of Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs. It's highly likely that you're not going to see rosters that have gotten to where you are have Tua doubles. what I mean by that is it's highly likely that excuse me. It's highly likely that the teams, first of all, you're going to be one of maybe 100 rosters in the Millie that have Demetric Felton to begin with. So there's a lot at play here, like this layered discussion. But you have to then think about what is the risk reward of the 60 to 100 rosters that are in my position right now. What are they thinking through? Well, they're probably playing it safe. They're probably doing this and that. How do I leverage off of that? There's probably not going to be a whole lot of Tua doubles from the night game. There's because the play it safe from here, if I've found myself here, considering all the salary that teams have, they're probably playing like Josh Allen with Stephon Diggs and playing it safe. There's a lot to unpack there from like, I guess from a macro perspective, your decision now is, I know I am one of 60 rosters that are in my position right now. How do I win a 60-person GPP from here on out? That's how you bias your decisions. I got to run, dude. I'm sorry to cut that off. I got another podcast I got to jump over to. You can take it out, but I got to run, dude.
So thanks, everybody. We have some other stuff to talk about. You can come into our Discord. Thanks for joining us this week. And in case you didn't know, Mark wears about 9 hats, and that's why he's got to run. See you guys in Discord, and talk to you soon.
See you.